And just like that, YouTube, we are back in the garage, continuing so many great projects we have for my Hyundai Accent. As you've seen in the past, we've been doing a whole bunch to this car to make it an extension of my personality, like I like to say in all my videos. So today we're actually going to be doing a fairly major mod, definitely one that will make this car stand out even more. As you can see here, I went ahead and picked up a set of H&R Lowering Springs for this vehicle. One thing I want to point out is that if you go to H&R's website, you actually won't see one specifically called out for the Hyundai Accent. However, I did a bunch of research to figure out which kit or which part number will work with my vehicle, and this is the one here. I'll also put a bunch of links down below just in case you guys are interested in purchasing some H&R springs. Not sponsored by H&R or anything, it's just I've had these before on my Fusion and I know they're good and I know they have great quality. So this part number here, 28899-1, it'll actually show up for a Kia Rio. There's one thing you don't know about Hyundai Accents and Kia Rios is they are almost identical. They're pretty much sister cars, I guess, if you would want to call them. They share a whole bunch of components, a whole bunch of pieces. And one thing that is the same on both, for at least this generation, which is 2012 to 2017, is the suspension components. For example, if you ever were going to go buy a new set of coilovers or coil springs from Hyundai, they'll actually be the same ones for the Kia Rio. That's why we know these ones will work and why I got this part number here, which says Kia Rio. When you guys open up your box of H&R springs, first thing you're going to see is some paperwork. You're going to have a bunch of like the warranty information, little pamphlets and whatnot. And I think even in here there's the two little decals for H&R, and then of course the little warning sticker that they give you. You don't really have to worry about that too much. This guy here is kind of like a technical information pamphlet. It gives you some more details about the kit that you purchased. So you will actually want to pay attention here. One thing that I've actually already did before the video was take my initial measurements, checking the stock ride height. Pretty much all I did was measure from the center hub on the wheels all the way up to the bottom of the fender. Did that on both the front and the back sides of the vehicle and wrote that number down. I did it in millimeters. You can do it in inches or whatever unit you want, but that's going to give us our stock baseline of where we currently sit. And then once we get the springs installed, then we'll be able to check and see just how much these guys dropped it. So these springs, once you get them installed, they are rated for a 1 1/4 inch drop. So we're going to hope to see that we get at least that much. One thing you want to make sure you're checking on, which it'll come in this orange pamphlet once again, is your bump stop information. If you don't know what your bump stop is, it's like the little pad which is normally up connected on the rod of your strut. If you kind of hit a big dip and bottom out, it'll prevent metal on metal contact and you hit that little bumper. Well, in some cases for lowering springs, you actually have to modify or cut that little bumper. But in this case, per H&R, our part number that is not listed on the bump stop information list, which pretty much means here on the note, if your part number is not listed, no action is needed. We won't actually have to cut that bump stop, and we should be simple as just take off the old components, put the new spring on, install them right back in, and we're good to go. We're going to start on the front side. We're going to go ahead and get the vehicle up, put them on some jack stands. Before you do, make sure you loosen your lug nuts so you can actually get them off. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, now that you got your front wheel removed, we're going to turn our attention to the suspension components and some hoses we got to remove. We're going to need to remove these two bolts here that connect to your vehicle speed sensor. There's one right here, 10 millimeter, and hopefully you guys can see one right here kind of hidden behind down near the bottom of the hub. That's also 10 millimeter. And then once you have those two removed, the last one we're going to remove is this one right up front, which is connected to your brake line, and that is a 12 millimeter. So let me remove those real quick. Then once you got those guys removed, as you can see, your vehicle speed sensor comes off. You'll kind of hang that off to the side, and now your brake line is also free to move around. So next up, we're going to go ahead and take off the stabilizer end link here. That's 17 millimeter. Once you have that out, go ahead and kind of give the stabilizer bar a push. Boom, there we go. Set that off to the side. I like to put the nuts right back on the bolts that I took them off so I don't misplace them. And now moving our way to the top of the strut hat. Same thing with the 17 millimeter. Go ahead and brake torque on that guy, and we'll remove this one as well. Don't worry, this one is not connected to the spring, so when you remove this one, it comes off with that little bumper there, and then now you can see your actual nut is down there on top of the strut hat. So set that aside, don't lose that. Back on the bottom, the next and last thing you're gonna need to remove is the two strut bolts down here. There's a nut on one side and then the bolt on the other. So I just get a wrench and then hold on to the bolt side. And on these ones, it's a 19mm for the nut. So let me go ahead and remove these. And at that point, be careful because your strut will be free and ready to come out. Now that you got the nut off, kind of give the little hub a wiggle. You should be able to pull out the bolt. So there's one. Like I said earlier, be careful because not only will your axle want to move, your strut assembly will also start wanting to move. Get ready to hold this in place and you'll be good to go. Just like that, it actually landed on the boot. Go ahead and grab it and try to finagle it off and out. One thing I'd recommend is this bracket right here where your brake line is. I'm going to take a pair of zip ties, cinch this guy down, not super tight. Reasons being is because you don't want to have the hub fall forward and actually pull your axle out of the transmission. Axles are pretty difficult to put back in, so that's just one thing you can do just to make sure it stays in place. Alright guys, we made our way over to the workbench with the strut assembly. So before you start moving anything, we're actually going to go ahead and mark this guy. What you want to do is just kind of get the orientation of the springs to the rest of the strut all in order so that when we install the new ones over there, we can make sure we're oriented exactly like the stock ones. It just minimizes the variability in our install. Start down here at the bottom. I'll probably use this little niblet here that's holding on. Put a little small black mark there. Come onto the spring and then just keep moving my way straight up the spring all the way up to the top of the strut hat. It just kind of helps you orient the new spring and making sure everything is in the same location as it was on the original install. Now that you've got the stock one marked, you want to kind of orient the new one in the same position that the old one is. And then we're going to also mark this guy straight down the line. So I'm going to mark it probably at the top and at the bottom, and we should be good to go there. Now it's time for the fun part, the part that's also the most dangerous, and that is going to be compressing these springs here. One thing you want to make sure you have right off the back is some eye protection, because there's going to be a lot of pressure in these springs. You don't want nothing to shoot off and hit you in the face and the eyes. Tools you'll need are of course some spring compressors or strut compressors. These are the ones I got here. They're OEM tools. I'll put a link below of where you can buy these guys. I can find them on Amazon, eBay, or even at your local AutoZone. I went ahead and purchased these guys because they were just most readily available. These are going to be an affiliated link, so if you guys do purchase with my link, I'll probably receive a commission with that, and if you do, I do thank you. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and open up the packaging, and I'll show you how to get them on there and show you how to tighten down and compress this spring. So what you're going to go ahead and need to do is, you'll see on here there's like these little pins here. These are safety pins. They prevent the tool from sliding down the springs once you have it on there. Push those aside, and that's how you allow this to clamp on to the spring itself. So what we're going to want to do is take both of these guys and put them directly across from each other. You can make sure you're evenly pulling down on this spring. I'll go ahead and get it on there, and I'll point you up close and show you exactly how I put one side on. So I got the clamps on there. I kind of had to spin them down so that they'll hold on with their own tension. And the one thing you want to make sure you're doing is, hopefully you can see here, that little safety pin, I push it forward, make sure it's up underneath the spring, which once again prevents this from sliding off. Do that on all four corners. It's time to get out the big guns. You can use an impact wrench that's pneumatic, or you can use an electric one, or you could probably even use just some common hand tools, but that'll probably take a little bit of time. What you're going to go ahead and do is start cinching down on these two guys. You want to do this as evenly as possible. A little bit on this side, a little bit on that side, a little bit on this side, all the way until you release the tension on the strut hat itself. This is a 19mm if you do have this exact spring compressor, and I'm going to start tightening them down little by little. Alright, and there you go. As you can see here, I got the tension off of the hat. So we're going to keep these on there, and we're actually going to jump onto the top side here where this nut is, and we're going to remove this nut. So for the top nut here, it's actually a 17 millimeter. I'm going to use my impact again to loosen this guy up. Should come off real easy. There's your nut. So now that you got the nut off, it's time to go ahead and take off your different pieces here. I'll kind of keep them in sequential order so you guys can get a kind of idea of how it goes together. Starting with the nut, then we got this guy here, which has a washer up top, so I'll keep that in there, but I'll put that down. Here, the spacer, and you got another washer there, a plastic one. And you got the top of the hat. There's that. I don't have to worry about the bumper. Like I said earlier, some applications you have to trim this bumper down, but it said for Kia Rios, which is the same as Hyundai Accents, you don't actually have to trim this bumper. So I'm not even actually going to worry about this guy. I'm going to leave it on there, and we're simply just going to remove the whole spring from the strut assembly. Just like that. So now that you got that off, we're going to go ahead and switch back to the 19 millimeter, and we're going to loosen these spring compressors slowly, alternating pattern, until we have the tension off of the spring compressors, and then we'll move on to the next part. Alright, now we have the tension off of the springs. You can go ahead and push back on the little locking pins. Set these guys aside temporarily. There you go. Now you got your old spring off. We'll go ahead and bring in the new spring. It kind of already looks like it's about that 1.25 inches off. So even though this guy is shorter, it's going to have a different type of spring brake to make the ride quality as best as possible. One thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this little sleeve off, and I'm actually going to slide it up onto the new one. Go ahead and slide the new spring onto the strut assembly, and we're going to line it up so that the bottom of the spring hits that little tab, which is right there. And one thing you may actually be able to do, since this is a lot shorter spring when it's not compressed, is you actually may be able to install all the strut hat assembly pieces without actually even having to cinch down with the spring compressors. So I'm going to line up all my little lines and my dots, and then I'm just going to go ahead and simply put everything back on, and we'll see what happens. And yes, just like I suspected, this one is a lot shorter, so I was actually able to get several threads on without it even being tight, which means when you're installing the new ones, you won't actually have to use the spring compressor. So make sure this guy is lined up with the top and then the bottom marks that I made earlier. Then I'm gonna go ahead and get this guy tightened all the way down, and you want to torque that nut there to anywhere between 36 to 43 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna aim right in the middle at about 40 foot-pounds, and then this spring assembly will be good to go back in the vehicle. All right guys, now that we're back at the vehicle, it's time to go ahead and reinstall our new lowering springs on the struts. Go ahead and cut your zip tie if you did use it. Make sure your hub doesn't pull your axle out. Get the strut assembly back up in place. Bottom side bolts facing out in your direction. Top side just has a little round thing that fits up in that little spot. Go ahead and slide this up into place. Make sure it fits in there nicely. Slide your hub back on. There you go. That actually will work perfectly. And now we'll go ahead and grab our bolts, and we'll put this guy back in place. Before we put the nuts back on, go ahead and apply a little bit of blue Loctite to the threads to make sure these nuts won't go anywhere. And then we'll go ahead and torque these guys on here anywhere between 101 to 116 foot-pounds. I'm going to aim kind of in the middle to 110. Now that you got those two bolts torqued down, we're actually going to make our way up top. Get this little spacer thing back on there, set it in the center, and then get the nut installed. But as you can tell, it's not all the way up to the top. So what you're going to either need is another person to lift up on the axle assembly, or just a little baby jack, and just kind of push it up until that nut engages with the threads, and then it'll hold itself in place after a few threads, and then you can tighten that guy down. Once you're getting ready to torque it down, it's going to be anywhere between 36 and 44 foot-pounds. So once again, I'm going to aim for the middle, right about 40 foot-pounds. Now that we got the top hat torqued on, now it's time for the stabilizer bar. Move this guy back and around. You may have to wiggle it around a bit to get it back in place. Once you get it in there, you may have to wiggle it around. There we go. Put a little bit of blue Loctite So the torque for this nut here is actually anywhere between 72 and 87 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna aim right in the middle at 80. It's time to connect back up the vehicle speed sensor, which is the one up here and the one down there where you can't really see. And of course the brake line bracket. This torque spec is anywhere between 6 and 9 foot-pounds, which is really not much. So I'm just gonna tighten them down by hand. Make sure you put your vehicle speed sensor back in the port exactly how it's supposed to be. And just like that, that's how you're gonna install your front lowering springs. So now I'm actually gonna do this exact same procedure on the driver's side, put the wheels and tires back on, and then we'll make our way to the back, lift up the back, and I'll show you how to do those. We got the rear tire off. So now we have access to where the rear spring is. And as you can see, it's gonna be a whole lot simpler than the front was. We're really going to only have one bolt here, which is this one up top, which holds the strut on the back side of the frame, and pretty much that's going to be it. I'm actually going to take my little jack over there and then move it just up underneath the frame, take this bolt out, then I'll release the jack, lower the tension, and we should actually be able to just pull the spring assembly out from the back. Now one thing I did just like the front, but I made my marks. So there's a mark here on the frame of the vehicle, mark here on the top bumper, marks going down the spring itself, and then of course down here at the bottom, more markings on the lower portion. Once again, this is just going to help us keep the same orientation on the new springs as it is right now on these current old springs. So now that I got the jack in place, I took some of the tension off of the strut. So now it's time to take a breaker bar to that bolt, break the torque. Then I'm going to take a drill, take the bolt out the rest of the way. Set that aside. Now that we got the strut free from the back, I think the other side is holding up the trailing arm just high enough that I can't really get it all the way out by hand. So I'm going to run to the other side, remove this other bolt on the other side, and then we'll try this. So now that I got that other side loosened up, it comes down a whole lot more. So as you can see, there's a bunch of play in it now. Pull up, or I should say push down rather, on the trailing arm. Pull up on the spring and pull it out from its pocket. Just like that. Now that we've got that out, go ahead and lay your new spring side by side with it. And just like we did before, we're going to kind of see if it's going to line up perfectly. But if it doesn't, just make sure at least that the top pad or the top little bumper and the bottom bumper will install fully onto your new springs. So now that we got those bumpers installed, go ahead and get your spring slid back up over the bumper. You may have to fidget with it a little bit and push down and pull up at the same time to get it back up and over, but you'll get it. Alright, there you go. Alright, move the camera so hopefully you guys can see. But now I'm actually just going to go ahead and jack back up the little spring assembly a little bit, just until I can get my shock absorber back in the position it was, so that I can slide that long bolt right through. So I'm looking directly through that hole, and you can kind of move the strut around and see where it's positioned at, and then lift it up to line it up perfectly. I'm gonna put a little bit of blue Loctite on the threads, and I'll go ahead and get this guy installed. This guy here is going to be torqued between 72 and 87 foot-pounds. So again, I'm going to aim for that middle, right at 80 foot-pounds. There we go. So what I did right there, I'm going to do exactly that on the other side, the driver's side. Then we'll go ahead and get these wheels put back on, drop the vehicle down, and we'll see just how low it goes. That, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the ground. We are ready to actually start measuring and seeing just how low, just how good these H&R Lowering Springs are. Definitely tell the front is a whole lot lower, and the back actually does look a decent amount lower, but without actually measuring, we won't really know. So my previous measurements here, as you can see, my front left and front right were about 352 millimeters and 355 millimeters, and then the rear left and rear right were also that same amount, 352 and 355. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get measuring and see just how low we actually are. Alright guys, and the numbers are in. Ride height of the front left sitting at 330 flat, and the front right, now we're at 330 flat, and for the rear left and rear right, used to be at 352 and 355 respectively, and now we're sitting at 342 and 345. Looks like we've got at least about an inch on the front so far drop, and on the back side probably about 10 millimeters. But keeping in mind that this is before the springs settle, it'll take a little bit of time, but they'll actually probably drop a little bit more, which will most likely get us down to that 1¼ inch. But nonetheless, I love the way it looks. It's really coming together, guys. And yeah, this is just an amazing thing you can do to your car to make it look good. And ladies and gentlemen, you have now successfully installed some H&R Lowering Springs on your 2012 to 2017 Hyundai Accent. Once you have this job done, one thing you do not want to forget to do is take your vehicle as soon as possible to get the alignment checked. Anytime you do suspension work, you always want to get in the habit of doing that. But other than that, guys, we are good to go, ready to go take this guy for a drive, see how it rides, see how it feels. As always, if this is your first time at the channel, be sure you hit that subscribe button below. Hit that like button if you like what you saw today, and of course stay tuned for more. Thank you again for watching Everything Averin. We'll see you on the next one.